initiative of the International Humanistic Management Association to try to focus on topics that are particularly interesting potentially to practicing managers. So in that sense, we're very happy to have Jennifer Hancock with us, who is dedicated to informing and engaging, especially with that group. So I thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you, Jennifer. And I'll just say, if you wanted to know more about the other initiatives of the International Humanistic Management Association, please feel free to look at humanisticmanagement.international. That's our webpage. And we have a lot of other events coming up. And if you wanted to get involved, please feel free to reach out to me or others. Thanks.
All right. And I'm Jennifer Hancock. I'm the founder of Humanist Learning Systems and a member of the USA chapter of the International Humanistic Management Association. And I am co-hosting with Elizabeth Castillo. Can you tell people about yourself?
Hi, I am an assistant professor at Arizona State University teaching organizational leadership.
Great. And today we have with us Dr. Gerry Wagner. He is of the Cultural Ambassadors, Inc., which is an offshoot of the Academy of Cultural Ambassadors. They are hosting a wisdom retreat in Santa Fe, New Mexico, August 7th through the 8th for leaders who have a passion for humanistic workplace cultures. The lineup of participants and presenters for this event is really impressive. So if workplace culture is of interest to you, please consider going. A little bit, and we will send out a link to you with that information. It was also on the invite. Gerry is the founder and national president of the Academy of Cultural Ambassadors. His career started as the head of research statistics with a Fortune 500 company in Chicago, and this was after getting his PhD from Iowa State University. From Chicago, he went to the University of Texas in Austin to be head of the Operations Research / Industrial Engineering Group in the College of Engineering, and while there, he started his first software company. Later, he joined the University of Nebraska in Omaha, where he created the Bachelor's of Science degree in Information Technology Innovation, or Technology Entrepreneurship. And while at the University of Nebraska in Omaha, he was also a Gallup Senior Scientist in the area of data visualization. During that time, Gallup published their landmark book called Well-Being, The 5 Essential Elements. It was that book that started him on his current path. And first he founded the Institute of Employee Wellbeing at Bellevue University, and now he's with the Academy. His personal focus is on positive workplace cultures, and it continues with peoples and places that emphasize kindness, compassion, and love as a natural part of their DNA. So you can see why we were excited to have him come on to talk about humanistic workplace cultures. Welcome, Gerry.
Thank you, Jen. Can you see me and hear me?
Oh, yes. Can we start with, questions about why workplace culture is important? What made you start thinking of culture as a way to fix what is wrong with business? And for that matter, what is wrong with business? Can you spend a few minutes kind of giving us a grounding in the subject?
Okay. Well, I wouldn't want to say that there's something wrong with business. Rather, what are the benefits of having a positive culture, workplace culture, from that perspective? My beginning with that really began when I started the Employee Wellbeing Institute at Bellevue University. And I was working with various companies. I'm a software person by background, as you just heard. And one of the software packages I had there was what's now become known as idea management. And I was particularly interested in gathering ideas from employees within companies about how the workplace culture could be improved. So that's what really got me started on my concentration on workplace culture as it is today. And when I was doing that, I realized that every so often I would run across a company that for some reason or other had an exceptional workplace culture. It was in the spirit, you could feel it. When you walked in the door, you knew it. Employees were happy, there was a different attitude, they were pleasant. And so obviously some places had a different kind of employee atmosphere, which now we're referring to as being a workplace culture. So that's where I sort of began. Now, I wouldn't say within all that there's anything wrong with companies relative to their culture. And I think that the importance of it has been demonstrated by the large number of companies that now in fact have gotten on board and now in fact have culture programs to improve workplace cultures. Now, I don't know if that kind of responds to what you're asking or not, but I don't think in terms of what's wrong, but rather We know that things can be improved in a lot of places, is being improved in a lot of places. And we used to think in terms of ROI, for example, the old return on investment. We don't talk about that anymore. We know the value is there. We know the improvements there. So there's no need of getting bogged down in terms of data analysis about ROI. It's just not necessary to do anymore.
Great. So you have some keys to what you consider to be important to workplace cultures. Can you give us your formulation for workplace culture?
Okay, I have a very simple one. I try to simplify things, and culture is a combination of the workplace behaviors, the behaviors in the workplace, and plus values. So culture equals values plus behavioral practices. And of those two, in my opinion, behavioral practices are by far the most important. Everybody now, or not everybody, most companies now have values. How they arrived at them, who knows? In some places with the actual process, other places probably in a boardroom, or in a management committee meeting. Everybody has values, but not everybody yet has behavioral practices. And that's the important piece of that equation of what culture equals. Culture, as everybody knows, is a very confusing thing. It's become so popular in the last 5 to 10 years, and everybody's sort of jumping on the bandwagon. There are endless blogs, there are endless papers, there are endless books, there are endless workshops, conferences, and so forth. And all that creates a lot of confusion. And so that's what led me to come up with what I consider to be a simple definition of what culture means.
So the first time, and by the way, if you're joining us, please mute yourself. The first time I encountered this, I was aware of the concept of workplace culture, but I was in India and people were telling me that their job description, they were the cultural ambassador for their company. That was their job description. Is that a new thing? Is that something that you promote? Can you talk a little bit about that phenomenon within the workplace and what role people who consider themselves to be cultural ambassadors for their workplace can play in creating a better workplace environment?
Okay, I think calling it culture ambassador as a title is a new thing. I've only heard it a couple of times. I heard it recently at the Global Force conference in where it was held. But it's a fairly new kind of title that people are attaching onto, and which I'm really happy to see happening. Culture, more formal culture activity is beginning to happen within companies. Not necessarily, probably not as a part of HR, but as a separate kind of entity that's identified with cultural interest and cultural practices. And so I'm delighted to see the term culture ambassador popping up for obvious reasons because of our name and where we started back a few years ago. So it is happening. People are I know some people that are putting it on their resumes. So it has a personal asset value as well.
When we talked earlier in the week, we had talked about, there's two dimensions to this, right? There's the upper level management initiatives along this. And then there's also ground up, from the bottom up initiatives to change culture. And you have a very interesting story that I'd hope you share about grassroots cultural change within an organization that you had started to tell me about. I said, hold that and we'll talk about it on Friday. Can you share that story?
Sure. First of all, I'm very much a believer that things should be inside out. They should start at the grassroots. Everybody, and lots of people talk about the importance that the CEO needs to be behind this. If he or she is, that's great. The important part of that, from my perspective, is you need to have an angel. The angel doesn't have to be the CEO, but if you're starting a workplace group around culture, you should have an angel. Somebody that believes in what you're doing, somebody that is recognized as being not necessarily influential, but respectful. I come from a software background mostly, where I deal with venture capitalist people. So that's where the idea angel comes from. Every workplace culture group startup should have an angel to help them out. The example that I was referring to earlier, and I don't want to mention who it was, but they started an employee well-being group. It was a group of people, probably about 15 employees, that had become involved in terms of interested in workplace culture. And that really happened because of Gallup's well-being book, the 5 critical or essential elements. So they became interested in that. They started a lunch and learn group. They started generating ideas. But the important point that I want to get at here is that the president was totally not interested. I can't use some of the kind of words that the person used, but the president was totally not interested in this group. That group continued to meet, they continued to grow, continued to be influential. They now have a charter that's a part of the company bylaws as to what the group is, what its makeup is, what its bylaws are, and so forth. So it moved from a small group of people with no interest and support from upper level management to now having a major influence within the entire corporation. But that's the story that I was mentioning to you previously.
I guess the next question is, before we open it up for questions, because I know we're starting to get questions from everybody else, but I kind of wanted to ask the question. So if one person, if you're in a company and you want to start this process, what are 3 things a person can do to try and start this process of cultural change within the organization? Are there three things someone can focus on to do that might help move this process forward and change the culture in their organization?
That's kind of hard to answer. I would say become an evangelist and become a teacher. Learn what you're trying to teach, learn what you're trying to evangelize, become aware of what's going on, get case stories, get case studies of what's going on, what value has been created as a result of this kind of initiative. So start simply with evangelizing and education. Going back to the example I used previously, they started with Gallup's book on well-being, which, by the way, I was formerly a Gallup, but I'm not advocating or not promoting them. But that book is wonderful. And I think every employee, every person, but particularly every employee, should have that book, and that there should be meetings, sessions, classes around it, because it's a great starting point to get started, starting place to get started.
Elizabeth, I know we have some questions that are starting to be asked in the chat room. Can we start asking them?
We sure can. And the first one is from Bill Veltrup, and he is asking, if you accept that all organizations are perfectly designed to get the results they get, what organization design elements most influence the nature and quality of workplace culture?
Not sure I'm qualified to answer that. Organizational design, my reaction to that is that, what's the infrastructure like? What's the hierarchy like, if there is a hierarchy? Sort of the best of all worlds from my perspective is there's no hierarchy at all, or at least a very, very shallow or narrow hierarchy. But in terms of a design, I don't know if there is a design that is best. I think about Fire Spring in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's nowhere similar at all to Farm Credit Services in Omaha, Nebraska, or CBiz in Kansas City. They're all very successful relative to their culture initiatives, but they're all totally different in terms of organizational design or organizational markup. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those are the sort of things I think about.
Well, one thing I'll follow up with that, one of the common themes seems to be some way for employees to be heard. So what, in your experience, what have you seen be successful? And Bill, do you want to weigh in anymore? Do you want to follow up on your question?
Yes, but I'll wait for your finish.
So Gerry, about learning how to, and employee feedback.
Okay. Well, as most people here are probably aware, one of the hot topics right now within culture is employee recognition, and rightly so. Employees like to be recognized. They like to give each other recognition. And this reflects some of my software background, but software tools are now available at very affordable rates for employees to give real-time, instant feedback that are tied to values or tied to behaviors. And so I think it's a very important thing that's going on right now within the entire world of culture. And employees are loving it. I don't want to mention product names, but there are products out there for doing this, and employees absolutely love it. Examples, employee groups will meet on a Monday morning to review who received bonus points for good recognitions during the week, things of that nature. So employee recognition has become hugely important, as it should be, and it happened very quickly. And there are tools available for doing it. That's an important part.
Bill, did you want to follow up on your organizational design question?
What I found to be helpful in is to somehow challenge the different teams in the organization to develop their behavioral instruments, if you will, to keep track of what it is they want in their culture and how are they moving toward it. So there's various ways that leadership can challenge the people in the organization to design ways that help them get to the culture they want.
I agree, and I would put vice versa. Employees can challenge management and decision makers as to what they want.
Absolutely.
And when you're developing your values and when you're developing your behavioral practices, that it should be done by the employees. You want it endorsed, you want it sponsored, you want it advocated by management, but that should be done by employees. The employees are the ones that are going to be living it every day, and other people are going to be watching how they're being lived. And so it really should start from the employees influencing management, not just the other way around.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that real quick? One of the things that Gerry and I talked about the other day was a lot of the times, the upper management is bought in and they're doing all the right things in terms of culture, and the people at the bottom really like the company because of that, but there's a middle manager somewhere in the midst that is gumming up those works. And so I had a question on, how does the top and the bottom work together to fix that middle that sometimes just messes up the culture?
I don't have a magic bullet for something like that. It's a matter of understanding each other. It's a matter of arriving at agreement on things, whatever those things might be. It's a matter of demonstrating value. And so if the people below that middle management kind of person demonstrates value, other middle managers are demonstrating what they're doing and providing value to their employees as well as the overall corporation, it starts to spread. And so it's a matter of demonstration.
Okay, our next question then is from Larry Clay, and he would like to know, what is a conceptual difference between a cultural ambassador and a social entrepreneur?
Interesting. They're pretty similar, in fact. Social entrepreneurship has become very popular also in recent times. We've got things like conscious capital. It's become a very, very major move. They're very much about culture. And so they're closely tied. The people who are cultural ambassadors, most generally at least, are very social entrepreneurship, or at least socially oriented as well. And so the culture thing is a very social kind of activity. And that's really important to recognize. Going back to the well-being book, one of the critical elements is social. And probably the most important element in those 5 critical elements is social. So social entrepreneurship, starting a culture group within an organization is an entrepreneurial activity, as I think about it. And that's, I used the word angel earlier. You know, that entrepreneurial activity within a company needs an angel, somebody that believes in what they're doing and will support them. So they're similar, and I'm pleased to hear that kind of question.
We don't have any other questions right now, so feel free to type in your question in the chat box.
All right, well, I'd like to follow up on that concept and tie it into back into humanistic management. And how does the movement for cultural ambassadorship tie into the larger framework of humanistic management? Because when you were talking about the social entrepreneur and the purpose of the business being not just about the business, but also recognizing the social nature of it, my brain was going, yeah, this to me is why I'm attracted to humanistic management. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. Specifically, what are you asking, Jen?
The tie-in between cultural ambassadors and the movement of the movement for humanistic management.
Okay. Well, I think you actually read at the beginning here sort of a tagline from our website. We believe in humanistic management. That's our thing, so to speak. We want humans to be treated like humans in the way that humans like to be treated. And if you look at all the culture stuff, whether it be recognition, rewards, bonuses, etc., it's all human kind of stuff. It then ends up having an influence upon profit and expenses and growth and so forth, but it's all human stuff. So they're one-on-one. They're the same kind of thing.
So our next question comes from Carrie, she said, we briefly discussed recognition and engagement. How does humanistic management and well-being approach performance appraisals and evaluations?
Okay. Well, again, opinion. Performance appraisals, as we used to know them, and by used, I'm not going back very many years. In a lot of places, they're still being used. But performance appraisals are essentially done. To do a large corporate-wide performance appraisal with maybe hundreds or maybe thousands of employees, where all the data gets dumped into one pile, doesn't have much meaning. If you want to have some kind of maybe artificial measure of engagement, and maybe this year it moved by 1% from last year, does that mean something? I sort of doubt it. It's good for promotion purposes and that sort of thing, but doesn't really have much value. So the idea of the old surveys don't have much value anymore. You know, that may be too controversial to bring up, but I think that's true. Quick, often appraisals, honest appraisals, are what really have value, and that's what's happening now. Things like the group meetings within companies to review recognitions over the last month, say, that's performance appraisal kind of stuff. The next thing I'd like to bring up, though, is that performance appraisal should be done within teams. And it should be done on the basis of achieving values and the basis of achieving behaviors. A general employee survey for engagement doesn't do that. The only people within a company that really know what each other are doing and how they're performing are within teams. If somebody in IT doesn't know what's going on with people over in accounting or somewhere out in the sales force, they only know within their teams. And the two most important measures within those teams are how well are they achieving the values and how well are they achieving the behaviors. So those are the things I think about relative to employee recognition, employee engagement, and so forth.
Jen, did you want to weigh in, and what has your experience been with performance appraisals?
Probably not a good time. The rain came in.
Oh, okay. We'll go to the next question then. So I'll follow up. Tom wants to know, so not all employees have the same way of being and doing. So have you ever come across some employees who do not want recognition while others can't get enough? And how do you balance that?
Sure. Yes, the answer is yes. In terms of balancing, it's self-balanced. If you've got a recognition tool and you want to participate, do so. If you don't find personal value or other value from it, then don't participate. So it's self-managed and self-balanced.
Okay, so self-organizing then, and
yeah, right.
Self-balancing. So one of the questions we got then was from Suzanne. And what are some promising examples of investments in humanistic management, positive culture, creating value for business and society?
So tell me again what you just said.
What are some promising examples, so I guess, of investments that people or companies have made in humanistic management, and how did they make society and the organization better?
Okay, well, I'd have to refer to specific companies. I mentioned a couple already, Firespring out of Lincoln, Nebraska. For example, they have a culture club that is the focus of culture within their organization. Kansas City, CBiz has the same kind of thing. Now, you'd say investment, that typically means money. In both of those cases, it's not money, it's time, investing intellectual capacity, but it's not investing money. Most of the things that really add value to a positive culture don't cost anything. If you don't have values, if you don't have behaviors, you need to spend some time developing those, but that may cost very little, if anything at all. So when I hear the word investment, I don't think in terms of money, because when we're talking about improving cultures, we're not talking about spending money. For example, benefits are part of HR. They're not necessarily a part of the culture. Benefits cost a lot of money, obviously, insurance and so forth, but that's not a part of what I think of as being a part of the culture. I don't know if that responds or not.
I think that's what they're looking for, is case examples. So what I heard you say then is that this can be done with little cash investment. So any company, it's available as a resource to any company to build culture.
Absolutely. I'm a promoter right now of the recognition kind of tools. And for $2 or $3 a month per employee, you can have the best tools that are available. And so that's a little bit, but that's noise level stuff compared to what a lot of people might think of in terms of being investment.
All right. So we have a question from Erica.
Can I quickly follow up on that though? The rain stopped, and I did have something that I wanted to follow up on that. So when I think back to one of the best managers I've ever had, and he was very good at getting to know us as individuals, to understand what made us as individuals tick, so that he could tailor our rewards as employees to us as individuals, and then collectively as a team. And I don't know quite how he did it, because I don't have that skill set, but it seems to me that when we're talking about rewards and reinforcements for behaviors, to a certain extent, it has to be individualized. And I heard this quite a lot at the last conference I went to, where CEOs were talking about their benefits, and they were talking about, it's about the individual, not the benefit. Mm-hmm. So can you speak to that? And does that match your experience?
Well, yeah, what I hear you saying is that effective leaders need to be able to understand, appreciate, and resonate with their employees individually. Not as a big group or as a group, but individually. And the examples that I've mentioned already, like Firespring, that's exactly the case. You can't tell if you walk in the door who is president. You go to Garmin, you can't tell when you walk in the door who's president. They're a part, they look like, act like a part of other employees. That's the outside world. And so that's the personal recognition and personal association between managers and individuals that I think about.
Okay, so we'll go to our next question from Erica Steckler. What are your thoughts on culture and authenticity? In your experience, what signals authenticity in organizational culture? And do employees care about authenticity relative to the organization's culture?
Sure, they care about authenticity. Not sure how this fits, if it does at all here, but Jen asked earlier about this word called love. The word love is appearing more and more in corporate values and in corporate behaviors. And love without authenticity is meaningless, it's shallow. And so what you're promoting, what you're advocating must appear and in fact be authentic. Otherwise, it's not going to change things.
So then, Jen, did you want to weigh in about authenticity?
I was wondering if Erica wanted to, if that answered Erica's question or not.
Yeah, no, it answered my question. I'm always just curious about, taking the pulse point of authenticity, and how would something like authenticity and love and culture, is that a nice way to think about humanistic management? Again, if we're trying to sort of pin what is humanistic management and how do we understand it sort of practically, around dignity and well-being, is authenticity part of that as well as love might be?
I think absolutely yes. It brought the word love here. It's only been not very long ago when I go into a company and bring up the word love, you'd see people getting a little bit edgy, sitting back, saying, what role does this have? That's changed a lot. And going back again, the only way for that to be meaningful and accepted is if it's authentic and being practiced. Coming back again to behavioral practices are what's really important.
Yeah, great.
I'd like to just get in a plug here also, if I may. I've mentioned behavioral practices a number of times. I think that's what's really important. There's a book, it's about a year old by now, called 31 Practices. If people aren't familiar with that, it's by far, I think, the best reference and readable kind of book today on the field of culture.
Great, thank you for recommending that. So that would be the how-to of how to walk the talk then.
That's exactly right, yeah.
I did.
Right, and that was actually the question I had is, okay, love, great, individual recognition and recognizing the individual, but how do we actually, what does that actually look like and how do we actually do it?
Mm-hmm. There's not a magic sauce to that. There's not a recipe for that. If you're starting up a culture group or you're part of a culture group, it's a matter of becoming aware of what has happened, what is happening, and then creating your own recipe. Lynette at Farm Credit Services used to always tell me, there is no secret sauce. And she was so right on target there. There's no recipe, there's no secret sauce. It's a matter of becoming aware of what has worked elsewhere, your own creative ideas, and coming up with your own program, your own recipe, what might work creatively, what might work within your own business.
So our next question then is from N. Tutskaya, who wants to know how to initiate the change in organizational culture if there's significant resistance from both managers and employees who are already very comfortable with the way things are, and they see change as a threat to their positional power or authority or comfort situation.
Mm-hmm.
What if the organization is fragmented and a lot of people are disengaged?
A tough situation, and we certainly see that. I can't mention names, but I'm thinking of one right now that I'm aware of. Terribly fragmented. The CEO is up and down. One day he's for it, the next day he's not for it at all. But in that case, there's one individual who is the culture ambassador that keeps plugging away and trying to evangelize and promote and advocate. Whether or not she will be successful remains to be seen, but it has to start with a few individuals or one individual who decide to become I like to use the word evangelist, the advocate for this kind of work and this kind of activity. So, what you just brought up, I think becoming much, much less frequent than what it was just a few years ago, but it still does exist.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, go ahead.
Can I follow up on that? What if the problem with the toxic, like say you're in a company with a toxic culture and the toxic individual is the boss? Is that fixable with an evangelical at the bottom, or even in the middle, or a group of them, or not? What do you think?
It can be done, yes, of course. And I don't mean this to be a negative kind of comment, but if you're in that kind of situation, go somewhere else. There are plenty of jobs today where that will support your individual beliefs relative to what culture should be. And if somebody's in a spot that has different beliefs relative to culture and just sees no way out of the situation, then it may not be a place for them to stay. It's not good for the company, and it's not good for them.
For the woman that you were mentioning as an example, who's in kind of a stuck organization right now, what is she doing behaviorally to be an ambassador in a difficult situation? So is she having one-on-one conversations with colleagues? Is she holding meetings? Is she doing newsletters? Like, what are the behaviors she's doing?
All of those things. She's one-on-one. We're calling this a lunch and learn. They do that sort of thing. She attends conferences and goes back and gives reports of what she thinks she's learned and what might be considered within that company. Something that I think fits along with this that I'm an advocate for, which costs nothing and can have high value, is starting a culture club. They become the recognized group within the company. It may just be one person. They start a culture club. And when you start a culture club, something that's natural to think about is having a newsletter. Like all organizations have a newsletter. We'll have a newsletter that maybe probably goes out electronically. If a few people read it, then it might start to catch on. It might start to make a difference. And something like that doesn't cost anything again. It's free. It costs some time to put it together. It takes some initiative to put it together, but it doesn't cost anything to do.
So what kind of stuff would go into that newsletter that would be cultural related? Are we talking about highlighting an individual's, something maybe they did outside of work that was really cool to help people learn about each other as people? Is it someone did a really great job on this contract? What goes into that sort of newsletter to help change the culture?
Okay, well, most culture groups are going to have activities, whether it be team building activities, marathons, picnics, Christmas parties, whatever it might be. It's going to be stories of what they have read somewhere, case type stories that they've read somewhere. They become a part of that newsletter. It becomes a matter of why do this, what and how, the old Simon type of activity. Approach rather. So things related to what's going on among the employees relative to behavior and activities. And employees love it. And it's the example that I'm aware of, employees love it. And I think it's possible. I can get whoever's watching here, if they want, example or copies rather of some of those newsletters. And that's the best way to see what somebody else is doing.
That would be fantastic. Have you thought about compiling a case study book, or putting everything that into a format that would be a template for people, understanding that it's more of an ingredient list that they have to come up with their own recipe?
Yes and no. A while back, I had something called Culture Ambassadors. It was a monthly publication, sort of like a newsletter. It was a monthly publication. We published 3 or 4 stories each month about positive workplace cultures. And I stopped that about 2 years ago, but there's still a ton of valuable articles in there about positive workplace cultures. I stopped it because, number one, is a lot of work. Number two, unusual workplace cultures are no longer unusual. They become usual. And so I felt like I was publishing the same thing with different companies, but the same stories over and over and over again, and didn't feel it was really contributing very much. So I did it sort of back then, not a book, but sort of back then with what I call Culture Ambassadors. And that's also online, and I haven't looked at it for a while, but there are a lot of great stories in there, whether it be Great Harvest Bread or Navasti or the Red Wagon manufacturers, whatever the case might be.
Okay, great.
And I know where the link for all of those are, so I'll make sure when we do a follow-up email with the links to the books you've recommended, I'll make sure we include that link as well.
Okay.
Terrific. Okay, so our next question comes from Catherine Calarco. It seems positive culture is based on a trust to allow people to be authentic and human. What do you recommend to build trust or model the way to assure that people are true and not just working to be popular?
Okay. I'm going to give an example that's a really old one. In my first software company, we engaged a psychological consultant, psychology consultant, who taught internal classes on truth and trust. And so that was one approach. And if I were to start, if I had a bunch of new employees and a bunch of employees again, I would repeat that because it was very, very effective. If you don't have trust, if you don't have truth, things fall apart. And so there needs to be I think some professional guidance in order to achieve that. I'd like to, this is a plug for myself, sorry. That company was sold in 1984, goes back a long, long, long time ago. The employees who became alumni had a yearly reunion at a outdoor beer place in Austin, Texas, every year for 30 years. So it gives you an idea of what can be done in terms of building up trust and honesty and belief in each other with the right kind of atmosphere.
Wow, that's amazing. Jen, did you want to weigh in on that, or?
No, I'm just really impressed. I think everybody in the world would love to work at a company where they felt that good about their coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah.
And the good news about that, Jen, those kind of companies are available. They really are. And I said earlier, which may have been inappropriate, if you're not happy with your circumstances, think about going somewhere else, because you can find places where that environment exists today. They were scarce 10 years ago, or rare 10 years ago, and almost unfound 20 years ago, but they are here today.
Is that statement include a little bit of privilege? Because I'm thinking of people who are very poor that are working at whatever job they can get. They're unskilled, they don't have a degree, and they're lucky to get a job at all. And there's a lot of that, and that's why we have exploitative businesses still, and problems with wage theft and all the number of things that go on that people have no ability to fix within their company. Is that statement that there's always other businesses something only available to people with an education, and is everybody else out of luck? And how do we fix that?
Good question. It's not only people with education, but it would be people in professional types of jobs. I don't really know about construction or day labor. I really don't know about that. But what I'm talking about, if you're an administrative assistant, if you're a secretary, if you're a staff analyst, with or without degrees, there are places you can go for alternative employment that do have the kind of environment that you're seeking, if you're seeking that kind of environment.
Okay. Well, to build on that question, are there any companies that you say that you would think would just be hopeless? I'm thinking, for example, two organizations, Wells Fargo and Volkswagen, that both just had huge scandals. Yeah. Are those companies fixable? Like, how could culture help those companies?
Yeah, that's a hard question, and I don't have the answers, of course.
Yeah.
What I think about in Wells Fargo or Uber or those kind of companies that have gotten notoriety. Yeah, it's a cultural problem. But I would suggest that within all of any large company like those, it's not a culture, there are a bunch of subcultures. And I'm sure there are positive subcultures within all of those companies where employees are liking the culture, but leadership isn't providing the overall values that are desirable to lead decision-making within the company. When I think about values, the definition of values is how decisions are made. And you can come up with dozens of definitions for values, but that's my definition. And when I think about places like Wells Fargo, did they have values that the decision makers were following? And they either didn't follow them or they didn't have the values.
Mm-hmm.
So can I follow up on that real quick? I was at a conference recently and someone said something very wise, which is, the workplace culture is defined by the last person promoted, right? Because that's what's rewarded. Whoever was just promoted, whatever they were doing was just rewarded, and that defines culture. And most people know that sometimes they promote the people who are negative for whatever reason, and then that's what gets reinforced. Can you talk about that and how we as managers and leaders should think about maybe the promotion process in the context of the sort of culture we want to create?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, something is not being done honestly there, for one thing. Of course, that's another different kind of issue. I'd like to kind of address that in a different kind of way, and that is the rapid growth in self-managed teams, where promotion is indeed based upon performance and achievement of purpose, achievement of values, achievement of behavioral practices. And self-promotion comes from within the group and not by somebody up in a hierarchy. And so the more that companies can reach towards recognizing people for promotion based upon their achievement among and within their peers is an approach that I think we should be headed for.
I think, Elizabeth, we have time for a couple more questions, and then I'd like to spend a little more time at the end talking about the Wisdom Retreat.
Okay. Let's see. So Suzanne wants to follow up on a question. What are some of the typical challenges for an entrepreneurial humanistic manager, innovator, advocate, and strategies to overcome those challenges?
Sales. It's selling your ideas, promoting your ideas. You use the word entrepreneurship, I think. Entrepreneurs sell. They sell beliefs, they sell ideas. And so to get a group going, to get it thriving, get it growing, it's a matter of marketing and selling your beliefs. Whether you're selling a product or you're selling the growth and improvement of culture, it's a matter of selling your beliefs, understanding your beliefs, believing your beliefs, and then marketing them.
Okay, so being clear about your beliefs and then selling them.
That's right. That's right.
One limitation that comes to my mind, just based on what you said, is like time. Is how do people find time to do this?
Yeah, that's a good point. And people are more and more being stretched for time. And I don't have an answer for that either. My sort of personal belief kind of answer is that everybody has time to do what they think is important.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something you want to achieve that's not a part of your daily work routine, and your daily work routine requires certain kinds of accomplishments, they can find time some way, some other way to achieve what they want to achieve. Mm-hmm. And so, I get sort of upset sometimes when I hear people say, well, I don't have time. Well, I know they're busy, and everybody's becoming more and more stretched all the time. But if they want to achieve something, they can find time to do it.
Jen, do we have time for one more question? Okay, so this is from Tom Bryant, and he raises a great point. I've seen academic and government organizations with strong esprit de corps built up over many years, only to be wrecked by the imposition of new senior managers who don't get it. Some of them have been able to go underground until the toxic leadership passes. What are the best techniques to hold such teams together during these disruptions?
Well, you use the word teams there. If they have teams, that team can hold themselves together. Maybe not in the same way as before, but they can still hold themselves together. So that's really about all I think about. They can still form and hold that team intact as it was before if they want to. And in recognition that there's some adversarial influence here, but it's a condition to be lived with and lived around and lived within.
Okay. So sticking together, huh?
Sticking together.
All right, Jen, did you want to wrap up?
Yes. So Gerry, can you tell us about, you're hosting a wisdom retreat for cultural ambassadors at the beginning of August in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Can you tell us about what this is and what's going to happen?
Okay. Well, I call it a retreat as opposed to calling it a conference because I like for it to have a personal, individual feeling associated with it. We have a cap of 100 people to attend. So that suggests, in fact, is true, it's not for profit purposes. We don't make any money. In fact, we lose money at that kind of level if we get to 100 people. It's not for everybody. It's for people who are serious believers. It's for people that are not out looking for a magic answer or a magic bullet or a recipe. They're out looking for ideas that they might then create their own environment or their own recipe, so to speak, their own song, their own way of operating, if you want to think of it. So it's for people who are really seriously interested in picking up ideas as opposed to how to do something. The other thing is, it's a place to form friendships. My wish is that someday the only people that attend are alumni, people that have attended in previous years. And so I want this to be an ongoing, so almost like club of people who know each other, have become friends, and collaborate with each other. Last year was the first time this was held. And we have examples of where people that attended became friends, became aware, and now are doing collaborative work together. I love that sort of thing. And that is for those kind of people, and not a place to go spend 2 days and have a good time or do a lot of sightseeing. You can do that in Santa Fe, but that's not what it's for. It's to form friendships, to pick up ideas, and to let this reach out into the future and not end when you leave the site.
Can you tell us a bit about some of the people who are coming and facilitating these conversations?
It's kind of all over the map, and I don't know what the range may be. It's a medical doctor in Canada. It's a researcher, organizational researcher in India. It's a head of a management consulting firm in Dallas. There are CEOs. It's all over the map. There are conferences that sort of get confused with what we're doing. They're primarily for HR kind of people. We do have some HR people, but it's not an HR kind of conference. So it's for anybody and everybody that has a serious interest in diving deeper into finding ideas for building a culture. And so it's not a particular title, it's not a particular kind of place within an organization. We probably have more organizational development kind of people than anybody else, but it's a wide mix, which is what you would expect. When you talk about culture, it doesn't fit into a discipline. It doesn't fit into a title. It's a wide kind of activity.
And you mentioned something about wanting students to come.
Yes, I'd love to have students involved. I'd love to have academics involved, and we do have a few professors. But it's hard to get them interested. I'm a former academician also, and I know how difficult it is to get academicians to change, number one, and to incorporate this kind of knowledge, this kind of activity into their courses. I'd love to see classes that are mostly internship type classes at universities on forming and creating workplace cultures, forming and creating workplace groups. I think that's an obvious kind of thing to be doing, but it's very, very difficult to get academics to do something additional or new. And so that really is not happening as far as I know. Having said that, I would love to see lots of students attending. We've had a couple, and they loved it and thought it was really valuable, but I'd love to have students attending. And students can attend for free. They need to pay their own travel expenses and find a way to do that, but they can always find some company to do that if they really want to. But they can attend for no registration fee. So I'd love to have university people involved, and I particularly like to have some students involved. So that's what I was referring to there.
Great. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to follow up with an email that includes all this information. We are going to post the video on YouTube so that you can refer to it later. And I wanted to thank you all for participating in the International Humanistic Management Association Humanistic Professional Lunch and Learn for this month. And I want to thank Gerry Wagner for joining us. I thought this was fabulous. I really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it a lot.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone.